1, 2, 3, 4. I got thoughts running through my head. I got thoughts, can't you see? I got thoughts, the books I read. I got thoughts, won't you listen to me?
I came up with the character of Bridge, and again, I wanted this to be a prequel to that main series that was set in 2030. So I set it 2 years earlier, right after a great big upheaval in the country, the LA riots of 2027, which weren't just LA, they were in most of the big cities, because of a federal budgetary crisis in 2026 and 2027. But what I wanted to do is in the Bridge Chronicles, and I've discovered this as I've written it, even though the Bridge Chronicles weren't really planned this way. There were certain points in the lore previous to the first novel, that points of history, things that happen, and I have covered those in the Bridge Chronicles books. So it is its own, set of stories, but the stories are leading up to a greater arc that's in that other series of books, which I will write eventually. Some of those events include the events in the first novel, which is the mayoral election of 2028, the establishment of the gangland, which is what If Tribe Equals is about, the appearance of magic and the technomancers, which is what the No Circuit, the second book, is about. And then some of the other characters that will feature in that second series have shown up in this series. It's shown up as either supporting characters or main characters that are not Bridges' character. They enter Bridges' orbit. Long and the Short Swords is an example of one of those. When we talk about the Killer Logan, for the most part, though the Bridge Chronicles do hit highlights of that history, they are their own novels. You won't need to ever read that series if you don't want to. If you read that series, whenever I write it and publish it one day, I don't think you'll have to read the Bridge stuff for it to make sense. We'll see. As I said previously, I was not really a huge fan of Cyberpunk when I first started coming up with this world, this lore. But as I started coming up with the RPG and reading more things and watching more things, I came to find out I really love Cyberpunk. I read all the William Gibson, read a bunch of Bruce Sterling, I've read Neil Stephenson, watched Blade Runner. One of the main impetus that started my love of Cyberpunk actually occurred before I got into Cyberpunk, before I started writing this. A couple of buddies of mine, Cleve and Seth. Cleve was running a RPG. Strange how most of my love of this stuff comes from role-playing games or video games. But he was running an RPG of his own making, and I can't remember the name of it. But it was very heavily anime influenced and Hong Kong action movie influenced, because at the time, it was 92, 93, that was just hitting big over here. And both those guys worked at a video store, and I'd go hang out with them after work and at the video store, just talking, bullshitting, and they would recommend movies to me. Movies like Nemesis, which, if you've never seen it, is a 92, 93 B-movie action movie, cyberpunk action movie, that really transcends its B-moviness just on being well put together and being an interesting take on cyberpunk. It's totally worth watching. I don't know about the sequels. I'm not sure, but it stars Oliver Grunier, directed by Albert Pyong, I think, who did Dark City later on. I think that's his name, but I'll have to check. If I got it wrong, it'll be over here. But I thought Nemesis was great, and Cleve was running an action-based RPG that was very similar to that sort of world. Lots of big guns and blow-up stuff and crazy religious orders and all this kind of stuff. So, very cool. As a result, I started getting into Cyberpunk. And as I was reading Under the Amoral Bridge again for what will be the next video in this series, I finished it and decided and was reminded of by a YouTube video of Howard Chaykin's American Flag. And so I've started going back and rereading that as well. Did not realize how much American Flag has influenced me in my writing of Cyberpunk. To the point where I was like, did I rip that off just not knowing? Or, I mean, Chaykin's work on American Flag, if you've never read it, it's a comic book that was an independent published comic book in the 1980s, 83, 82, 83, something like that. Published by First Comics. One of the first few years of independent comics actually being a thing, when we had comic stores where you could get direct comics from independent publishers. First Comics was one of the original independent comics where the creators actually owned the work. They were able to pull creators who had probably worked with like Marvel and DC at the time, but had not quite totally hit the big time yet, and were able to. Guys like Howard Chaykin, Steve Rude, Mark Badger, Stephen Grant, Timothy Truman. There's a lot of great comic creators that worked for First Comics or for Comico or Eclipse or a number of the big ones then. But Howard Chaykin really made his name with American Flag. And I've started a reread of the whole series now. I'm probably about 30-something issues into it. And it varies in quality. There's times when Chaykin left doing the artwork duties, the art suffered. There were some okay artists that worked on it, but they didn't have nearly the chops that Chaykin did, nor were they trying to push the envelope that Chaykin did. Because as an artist, he pushed panel layout a great deal. He and Ken Bruzenak, I think I'm saying that right, pushed the lettering and actually made the lettering a very, very heavy part of the design of the page and the panels. Knocked out work. And even beyond the art and design aspect of it, the story, as a teenager, I loved it. It was swashbuckling, as even Chaykin would say, it was guys with big guns and girls with big tits. I mean, that's a great description of of the story. Now, reading it these days, there's a lot of things that a modern audience might be a little triggered by. There's definitely plenty of misogyny. There's racial slurs through it. There's a lot of just a lot of content where people are disparaged in a way, and it's not sensitive in any way, shape, or form. It's not politically correct. But it's very over the top. It's satirical. If you read it and you realize that while it's taking itself seriously, it's also a satire. It comes into focus a little more. So you have to read it with an eye towards the 80s as opposed to the 2K teens. I mean, it's not a modern work, but it is a fantastic piece of work because of how much ground it broke and how apropos it is to our times now. Honestly, the story is about America has kind of fallen and fallen apart, and 20 years earlier, and it's set around 2030, 2031. Imagine that, and a corporation has kind of taken over government administration of the Earth in America, called Plex, Plex USA. They run their administration through Plex malls. Again, it was the 80s, so malls were a big thing. And so they run through Plex malls, and the actual government is on Mars. They left Earth. They're on Mars and the Moon, and they have moon bases. So obviously, this was the 80s. We thought by 2000s we'd have a moon base, or maybe a Mars base. Who knew? But there's a lot in it about the media and the use of violence. As a matter of fact, organized sports are outlawed because they've become combat sports. Combat basketball is a big thing in the early parts of the series. and of course pirate video and all that. And it didn't really anticipate the internet so much, which is usually something that Cyberpunk has. But for the most part, I consider it a work of Cyberpunk. And when I talk about Cyberpunk, getting off American flag for a minute, when I talk about Cyberpunk, one of the things I've always said about Cyberpunk that I enjoy is that it is the ultimate fictional manifestation of class warfare. Some of the main tropes, and these are things that I've taken to heart and used in my books, is that corporations are more powerful than governments. As a matter of fact, in some cases, especially in my work, they are governments to themselves. As a matter of fact, my local governance license structure in the books, where corporations could bid to control the local or state government of their choice, and it went to the highest bidder, is very much a manifestation of that whole corporations as more powerful than governments, city-state trope that's in Cyberpunk. And again, it's that class warfare thing where the corps, the suits at the corporations are, the elites, and then we've got the peasant classes, which are basically your street punks, your cyberpunks, your hackers, your assassins, and all that sort of thing, where they intersect and are used by and oppressed by these wealthy elites, and don't really have anything where they can fight against other than violence and civil disobedience and civil unrest and that sort of thing. Another one of the tropes of Cyberpunk that I used is a very noir feel, very stylistically noir, like noir detectives from the 40s. Your Humphrey Bogart movies, your Maltese Falcon, and your Philip Marlowe's and things like that, which was something William Gibson wrote a lot, especially in his earlier works. So in that sense, I wrote Bridge as a mystery that was kind of a noir mystery, where in the first novel, he chances upon a recording that he's trying to sell, because he thought the guy who was giving it to him was trying to sell it and trying to blackmail someone. And the mystery isn't what, but who and why. Another of the tropes of Cyberpunk is actually in the name, cybernetic gear. So I was always a big fan of Cyberpunk 2020. I ran a campaign, as I said, for a few years. So I wanted to have the tech be very similar to the Cyberpunk era, where you have metal arms and metal gear and all that. And a lot of the cybernetic gear is very overt and very over the top, 80s metal punk kind of stuff. And of course, writing at the time, I didn't really anticipate a lot of the nanotechnology being as large, although I have since incorporated some of that in there. One of the other tropes that mark Cyberpunk is, of course, hackers, and using a global information network, which in this case is the Global Net. The Global Net was set up around this time in the history of this world, where all the countries of the world got together and turned the internet into the Global Net with more security. Global Net IDs are individual, so you have your Global Net ID and it's tied to you, and you are specifically that Global Net ID. Now, obviously, we've got hackers, so one of the things hackers sell or create is their own Global Net IDs that are not linked to any person, isn't linked to them. That's how they can commit crimes on the Global Net without being caught. And incidentally, most of the information about the Global Net and the riots and all that is available in the Globalpedia section of the website bridgechronicles.com, which is the website for the Bridge Chronicles series. So that's the Bridge Chronicle. That's mostly where what it was influenced by and how it came about. My next set of videos may be a week or 2 weeks away. I'm going to start discussing Under the Amoral Bridge, which is the first novel in the Bridge Chronicles series. And my intention from here forward is I'm going to do an episode of multiple parts on a Bridge Chronicles book. Then I'm going to shift back to the Stepping Stone, and then back to Bridge, and I'll do one then the other, until I'm finished. I hope you, if you enjoy Cyberpunk, or even if you don't, I hope you give my novels a try. They are linked down in the bottom there, down in the description, as well as the link to the website, and of course you can hit the subscribe button over here. If you like this video, I'll hopefully have a whole bunch more. I'll see you when the next video comes around. Hold on, damn it. All right.